Hi everyone, this is Grandmaster Eugene Perlstein, and together with Chess.com, welcome to part 2 of my series on the practical endgames. Now, if you recall, in part 1, I showed you a few examples of what I call theoretical endgames, where the result is already well known. For instance, the A pawn and the bishop of the opposite color against the king, that's a draw. But here, let me show you another example of a theoretical endgame. We have a Philidor position. For those of you who don't know what Philidor position is, I highly recommend to look at the chess mentor courses for endgame on chess.com. And the idea here is that black has an extra pawn, but whenever he tries to make progress, for instance, if he plays this move d3, white simply drops back and starts giving all these checks until the king totally can't hide, runs away, and then attacks this pawn. This is called the theoretical endgame because once you know that you have to keep the rook on the third rank to keep the draw, this is it. This is as much as you have to know. But this is different from our topic. Our topic is practical endgames. If you recall, in part 1, I showed you a really cool practical endgame from the game Capablanca Ragozin. And Capablanca was really famous for playing these endgames really well. Well, today I'm going to show you a different practical endgame by yet another world champion, Alekhine. So here we have the position from Alekhine's game. He's playing against Thomas. And you can, just looking at the position, you can quickly spot that black is better. Black has much better pawn structure, and white's bishop on b2 is really horrible. And all of these pawns are on the dark squares. So it's obvious that black is better. But it's unclear if black is going to be able to break through. Thus, this is a practical endgame. You have to be able to have a plan, and you have to kind of break it down into stages to try to execute and win it. So Alekhine, who is famous for his combinations, for his imagination and tactical abilities, he is also one of the world's renowned endgame players. Just like Capablanca, whom he beat in the match, he had to learn how to think in terms of schemes and to really execute plans. So looking at this position, if you want to try to figure out the winning plan, why don't you try to pause the video and think about this position in your head using kind of verbal language, right? Don't just calculate variations and try to figure out black's plan. And see if you will match what Alekhine had to say about this position. So in this position, Alekhine broke it down into the following plan. Obviously, you want to play against the weaknesses on a3 and c3. But for now, just using the rooks and bishop is not enough. You have to bring your king over. So the first stage of the plan is black is going to bring his king over to the center, to this outpost on d5. That king would be able to quickly maneuver around either to the king side or to the queen side when it matters. Number 2, you want to improve your pawn structure to even better than what it is now. So ideally, you want to play a6 to have the pawns a6, b5, and h5 with the idea to try to play h4. So that's number 2. You improve your pawn structure to the best possible way. And number 3, you look for breakthroughs, either with f6, e5 in the center, or with potentially b4 on the king side. Sorry, on the queen side. So let's see how Alekhine executed this plan. So king f8, first stage of the plan, you got to bring the king over. So does white. White is going to bring the king over as well. And once again, I want to stress out that in the end game, unlike the opening and the middle game, king is a very valuable piece. Even if you don't have any use for the king just yet, having the king in the center will give you a pretty big edge in the ensuring tactics. So let's see what happens next. King e7, king f2, king d7, king e2. So both sides are just bringing their kings to the center. King c6, rook a2. And notice that white has to be extremely passive. There is no way white can do any damage at all. Now, Alekhine doubles the rook. So basically, he wants to pin down all of these pieces by defending the pawn. So white plays rook a1. And simply king d5, king d3. So the first stage of his plan is complete. And now he embarks on the second stage, trying to improve his pawn structure. So he plays this move rook 6 to a5. And the idea here is quite simple. He wants to play the move a6 so that the b5 pawn will never be under attack. For instance, when the bishop comes to c1 and rook can come to b1. I should mention that this is a little bit awkward square for the rook, and perhaps he should have kept the rook on c6 and started with the move h5 first. Because now with idea h4, white has to play h4 himself. And here, Alekhine can just simply switch the rook over to c6 at the right moment, and he can start his plan with f6 and e5. I feel like the rook on c6 is much better placed. But let's see what happened in the game. So he plays rook a5. White simply has to go back and forth, so white waits with bishop c1. a6, so notice that the pawn structure is improved. b5 pawn will never be under attack. Rook b1 is impossible. Bishop b2, so white has to wait. And now h5 exclamation. Of course, Alekhine could have played f6, e5 right away to try to break through, but it's more important to put all of your opponent's pawns on dark squares. So h5 with idea h4 really forces white to play h4 himself. And here is the fundamental breakthrough. f6 with idea e5. And here white made a really losing move, inaccuracy, which cost him the game. He played bishop to c1, which is a big mistake. It's actually not so obvious why this is such a big mistake, but the only move that could have prolonged the game and played on was king c2. And the idea is that after e5, pawn takes, this move king to b3. And the idea is that after black takes on d4, pawn takes, the g3 pawn is immune.